looked effortless at times, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did.
That elite close control, the lightning quick acceleration, he could just ghost past defenders. You'd think he wasn't putting in a huge shift, but then, bam, the ball would be in the back of the net. What was the key to that economy of efforts?
Well, what's fascinating about Romario is that his minimal effort on the surface masked incredibly honed instincts and an almost unparalleled understanding of space within the penalty area.
Right.
Think about his time at Barcelona under Johan Cruyff.
Yeah.
They often played a 3-4-3 or 4-3-3, formations known for their attacking width. Romario's role as this central striker was laser-focused.
Yeah.
Occupy those advanced positions, make those intelligent runs, and let the midfielders and wingers create the opportunities.
Okay.
He wasn't tasked with a lot of defensive work. His genius was, purely in the final third.
And he was so effective in those systems. Then you look at the 1994 World Cup for Brazil, a slightly different tactical approach, a more pragmatic 4-4-2 with Bebeto.
A bit different, yeah.
Our analysis shows that while he still had that predatory instinct, you saw him adapt slightly, showing more mobility, sometimes drifting wider, or even dropping a little deeper to link up play. But that clinical finishing was still his defining trait, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the numbers, across roughly 700 matches, he scored over 550 goals. That .77 goals per game average is just phenomenal.
Wow.
And it wasn't just quantity, it was the quality and importance. At Barcelona, he was the focal point of that dream team, constantly occupying those central defenders, which in turn created space for the likes of Stoichkov and Guardiola to operate.
Right, creating space for others.
And of course, that golden ball he won at the '94 World Cup that tells you everything about his impact on the world stage.
It's worth remembering why Cruyff brought him to Barcelona in the first place. His goal-scoring record at PSV Eindhoven was simply unbelievable. 165 goals in 167 games.
Just insane numbers.
When you see numbers like that, combined with his obvious flair and, South American pedigree, you understand why he was such a coveted player.
What's interesting for you to consider, though, is that despite this incredible talent, his career wasn't without its complexities. There were certainly whispers and even open criticisms about his training commitment.
Yeah, you heard those stories?
He had clashes with coaches, sometimes over tactical instructions or his playing time, and his off-field life was, shall we say, colorful.
Huh. Colorful is one way to put it.
Did those factors ultimately limit what he could have achieved? It's a question worth pondering when you think about building a team around such a unique individual.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears and talk about Roy Keane, a player whose greatness was forged in the fires of sheer determination. When you watched Keane, it wasn't about dazzling skills as much as that incredible tactical intelligence and relentless pressing. He was like a terrier in midfield, wasn't he?
Oh, completely. Always closing down opponents, winning those crucial tackles.
Yeah, and setting an incredibly high standard for everyone around him.
You're right. His physical and mental toughness were just on another level.
Yeah.
You always felt like he would run through brick walls for his team, and he expected that same level of commitment from his teammates. His leadership wasn't about fancy speeches. It was about leading by example through his intensity and unwavering will to win. For him, it was about maximizing every ounce of his ability every single game.
And tactically, he was so integral to Sir Alex Ferguson's Manchester United. In that classic 4-4-2, he was the engine room, that box-to-box midfielder who could break up opposition attacks, win possession, but also drive forward with purpose and initiate attacks.
Definitely.
As European football evolved and teams started playing different formations, like the 4-5-1, Keane adapted his game, becoming a more disciplined presence in the midfield.
And for the Republic of Ireland, you often saw him take on even greater responsibility in a more central role. He had to balance those defensive duties with the need to drive the team forward. While the tactical structures around him might have varied compared to the consistent setup at United, that same intensity and leadership were always evident.
If you look at his Premier League stats for Manchester United, 326 appearances, 33 goals, 31 assists, those numbers don't fully capture his influence, do they?
Not at all.
They tell a story of a player who was more about disrupting the opposition, winning those key midfield battles, and providing the platform for the more creative players to shine. And then you see those 69 yellow cards and 7 red cards. They speak volumes about that uncompromising edge he brought to every game.
Exactly. What's fascinating for you to consider is why a manager like Ferguson, who always valued discipline and hard work, was so desperate to sign Keane. It really came down to that performance against United in the 1992 League Cup final when Keane was playing for Nottingham
Oh,
Forest.
yes, that game.
Ferguson saw that raw determination, that refusal to be beaten, and knew that Keane had the exact qualities he wanted to inject into his midfield. He even famously intervened personally to ensure Keane chose United over Blackburn.
Wow, Fergie really wanted him.
He did. But just like Romário, Keane's career had its controversies. Those disciplinary issues are well documented. He certainly wasn't afraid of a tackle, sometimes to his team's detriment.
No, definitely not.
There were also occasions where his aggressive nature on the pitch and in the dressing room caused friction. When you're building a team around that kind of personality, you have to consider the potential downsides as well.
Good point. No, it's really interesting when you think about the few occasions these two titans actually faced each other on the pitch. The 1994-95 Champions League group stage matches between Barcelona and Manchester United.
Oh, those games. Iconic.
The first leg at the new camp was a bit of a demolition, Barcelona winning 4-0, and you won't be surprised to hear that Romário was on the score sheet.
Of course he was.
Then the return leg at Old Trafford was a much closer affair, a 2-2 draw, and again, Romário found the back of the net, including that memorable nutmeg on Peter Schmeichel.
Oh, that nutmeg. Legendary.
For you watching those games, you really saw that contrast in styles play out directly.
Absolutely. Those head-to-head encounters, though limited, offered a glimpse into how these two contrasting forces matched up. Romário's clinical ability to seize those scoring opportunities versus Keane's relentless efforts to disrupt Barcelona's flow and protect his defense.
So, as you think about building a team today, who would be the modern equivalents of these players? It's not a perfect science, obviously, but who comes to mind?
Well, when you consider Romário's profile, that low center of gravity, the agility, the instinctive movement inside the box, and that deadly finishing, the comparison with Sergio Aguero is often made.
Yeah, I can see that.
Aguero had that same knack for making difficult finishes look almost routine.
That feels like a pretty good comparison. What about for Keane?
For Keane, you might look at someone like Declan Rice at Arsenal. He has that ability to shield the defense, win tackles, and increasingly dictate the tempo of the game.
Okay, Rice makes sense.
You could also perhaps point to a player like Wilfred Ndidi, who is renowned for his tackling and ball-winning abilities. However, what's perhaps harder to find in the modern game is that exact level of vocal, almost intimidating leadership that Keane brought to his teams.
Yeah, that intensity is rare. It's fascinating to consider how modern AI metrics might analyze their games. Our analysis suggests that Keane would still score incredibly high in areas like defensive disruption, tackles won, interceptions.
Definitely.
And his work rate in terms of ball recoveries and duels won would likely be phenomenal. His leadership qualities, though harder to quantify directly, would likely correlate with positive team performance metrics. However, he might not score as highly in metrics related to creative passing or progressive play compared to some of the more attack-minded modern midfielders. And of course, those disciplinary issues would likely show up in the data as a potential negative impact.
Exactly. And for Romário, the AI would undoubtedly highlight his exceptional finishing ability and efficiency in front of goal. His expected goals numbers and his conversion rates would likely be off the charts.
Unbelievable finisher.
His positional intelligence, that knack for finding space in the most dangerous areas, would also be evident in heat maps and spatial analysis. And his effectiveness in those tight spaces within the penalty box, those successful dribbles, would further underscore his attacking prowess.
But on the other hand, for Romário, the AI might show lower numbers in areas like defensive work rate pressures applied, ball recoveries in defensive areas.
True.
His involvement in build-up play and progressive passing might also be less significant compared to some of today's forwards who are more involved in the entire attacking phase. And there might be data points that reflect a less consistent adherence to strict tactical instructions.
Which brings us back to that fundamental question for you. If you could have one of these players at their peak to build a team around, who would you choose and why? Imagine Roy Keane with Romário's almost supernatural talent.
Wow, yeah.
That combination of world-class technical ability and that relentless, never-say-die attitude. He would have been an absolute force of nature, a truly complete midfielder capable of dominating every facet of the game.
Unstoppable. And then flip it. Romário with Roy Keane's unwavering work ethic, that fierce determination, and that demanding leadership. Could he have become the undisputed greatest striker of all time?
It's possible.
You take that incredible natural talent and combine it with that kind of relentless drive. It's almost a frightening prospect for opposition defenses.
Let's dig a little deeper into why Romario's type of genius is still relevant today by looking at that comparison with Sergio Aguero again. As we touched on, the similarities in their playing styles are quite remarkable.
Yeah, they really are.
That low center of gravity allowed them both to change direction so quickly and maintain balance in tight areas. Their agility in evading defenders in the box was exceptional, and they both possessed this incredible instinctive movement to find those little pockets of space that defenders just couldn't track.
Like ghosts in the box.
Exactly. And of course, the clinical finishing, that ability to score from seemingly impossible angles with minimal backlift, was a hallmark of both their games. Aguero, you could argue, embodied that Romario-esque poaching instinct for a modern audience.
And when you really analyze Romário through the lens of those modern AI metrics, it really confirms what we saw with our own eyes, doesn't it? His clinical finishing and efficiency would be off the charts.
Totally.
He had this uncanny ability to score with so few touches in the box, and his expected goals numbers versus his actual goals scored would likely show a significant overperformance, highlighting his exceptional finishing.
That XG overperformance is key.
His positional intelligence, that knack for being in the right place at the right time, would be clearly visible in any detailed heat map analysis. And his success in those crowded penalty areas, evidenced by successful dribbles and touches in high-threat zones, speaks to his mastery in tight spaces.
However, as we've discussed, the data would also likely point to areas where his game differed from the demands placed on many modern forwards. His defensive contributions, in terms of pressing opponents and winning the ball back in advanced areas, would probably be lower.
Yeah, not his strength.
Similarly, his involvement in the team's build-up play, those metrics around progressive passes received or completed, might suggest a more focused role within the final third.
So, if you were a manager in the 2020s and you had a player with Romário's skill set, how would you best utilize him? Where on the pitch would he be most effective?
Good question.
Our analysis suggests that he might thrive as a second striker in a 4-4-2, where he has a strike partner to occupy defenders and create space. Or perhaps as an advanced forward in a counter-attacking system, where his pace and instinct for exploiting disorganized defenses could be devastating.
That makes sense.
He could even function as the central striker in a 4-2-3-1, but with the understanding that his primary focus would be on scoring goals, and the midfielders and wingers would need to shoulder more of the defensive and creative burden.
You probably wouldn't see him as a traditional winger or wide forward in most modern systems, right? Those roles typically demand significant defensive work rate and the ability to deliver consistent crosses, which weren't necessarily Romario's strengths.
No, not really his game.
And a deep-lying playmaker role is definitely out of the question. His strengths were all about getting into goal-scoring positions.
Absolutely. And in terms of complementary players in the 2020s who could bring the best out of a Romário-type forward, you'd be looking at creative midfielders who can unlock defenses with intricate passes. Think players like Jamal Musiala, Kevin De Bruyne, or Bruno Fernandes.
Yeah, players with vision.
And then you'd want forwards who offer a different dimension, perhaps someone like Harry Kane who can drop deep and link play, or a more dynamic all-around forward like Victor Gyökeres to draw defenders away and create openings.
Good shouts. Now let's circle back to Roy Keane and those modern comparisons with players like Declan Rice and Wilfred Ndidi. As we acknowledge, they share some key traits. The tackling ability, the positional awareness, the defensive work rate. But it's that intangible quality of Keane's vocal, demanding leadership that seems harder to find in its purest form today.
It really does, and when you examine Keane through modern AI metrics, his strengths in breaking up play those high numbers for tackles won, and interceptions, his leadership qualities, which might be reflected in team cohesion and defensive solidity metrics, and his relentless work rate, seen in ball recoveries and successful duels, would all stand out.
Yeah, the stats would back up the eye test there.
However, in today's game, where midfielders are often expected to contribute significantly to the attacking phase with incisive passing and progressive runs, Keane's metrics in those areas might appear more conservative.
Perhaps.
His disciplinary record would also likely be flagged by any objective analysis. And perhaps in terms of dribbling past opponents in midfield or providing assists, his numbers might not be as high as some of the more attack-minded central players.
So if you were a manager in the 2020s with a player possessing Keane's attributes, where would he fit best? Defensive midfielder, that classic number 6 role, seems tailor-made for his ability to shield the defense, win tackles, and dictate play from a deeper position.
Spot on.
He could also function as one of the central midfielders in a midfield three, providing that crucial defensive anchor and allowing the other midfielders more freedom to attack.
Makes sense.
You probably wouldn't see him deployed as a central defender, though, as his game was so much about winning the ball in midfield and driving forward.
Right, he needed to be in the thick of it.
And certainly not in any attacking midfield roles. That wasn't where his strengths lay.
Definitely not. And which types of players in the modern game would benefit most from having a Roy Keane alongside them? You'd immediately think of those incredibly gifted attacking midfielders who sometimes lack that natural inclination to track back and defend someone, like a Bruno Fernandes or a Kevin De Bruyne.
Oh, absolutely. Keane would cover for them.
Keane's presence would provide that vital defensive screen and allow them to focus on creating chances. Also, for younger, emerging midfield leaders like a Declan Rice early in his career, having that experienced, demanding figure alongside them could be invaluable for their development.
Great point. Okay, so we've explored their incredible talents, their contrasting styles, their impact on their teams, and how they might be viewed through the lens of modern football. And that brings us to the ultimate question for you to consider.
Here it is. Would you rather build your team around a player with the almost supernatural God-given talent of a Romário, someone who might not always put in the hard yards in training but could produce moments of absolute genius on the pitch?
The genius.
Or would you prefer to build around a warrior like Roy Keane, a player who demanded 100% from himself and his teammates, who led by example with his relentless work rate and fierce determination, even if he perhaps lacked that same level of innate, breathtaking skill?
The warrior. It really boils down to your fundamental philosophy as a team builder, doesn't it? Do you prioritize unlocking moments of individual brilliance that can change a game in an instant?
Yeah.
Or do you value that unwavering collective spirit, that relentless intensity and leadership that can grind out results and create a winning mentality? It's a fascinating question with no easy answer.
It truly makes you appreciate that there are so many different paths to achieving success in football, and that both individual brilliance and collective strength play crucial roles.
Exactly.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive into the contrasting worlds of Romário and Roy Keane. Hopefully, it's giving you some food for thought about the different ways to build a winning team.
We've examined their unique qualities, their tactical roles, their encounters on the pitch, and even how modern analysis might assess their contributions. It's been great fun.
Yeah, definitely. If you enjoyed this tactical discussion and these historical comparisons, make sure you subscribe to the AI Goat podcast so you don't miss any of our future deep dives into the beautiful game.
Thanks for tuning in.